All right, guys. Thanks for joining this Friday. It's February 19th, 2021. We're frozen down here in Texas, but starting to thaw out. So, that's always a good thing. But with that, just wanted to give you the heads up. I am doing this from home today, which means you may occasionally hear a dog in the background or my battery backup going off. So we're still having some rolling blackouts out here. So if you hear that, forgive me and give me 1 second as I pause the beeps, and we'll continue on. But again, thanks for joining today. This is going to be a fun webinar. I am going to send around a recording of this afterwards, so if you want to share it with anyone in your firm, please feel free to. But basically, this is one where we just kind of step back, have a little fun. We're going to kind of loosely walk through a hack, and then we'll end with a Q&A where you guys can ask any questions, or we can dive into more details on anything that you like. So just quick background, my name is Brian Hahn. I'm the founder here at Tradecraft. I'm a financial operations geek, privacy enthusiast, and a fintech skeptic. You're going to hear a little bit more about that. Today, we're talking about hedge funds. I come from the hedge fund and the RIA world. I founded an RIA, hold the Series 65, and dropped out of the CFP program. So, in addition to cybersecurity, I've been in, the position that you guys are, whether you're in charge of operations or chief compliance officer or whatever your role may be. And so now at Tradecraft, I work as an ethical hacker, and we work with wealth management firms, SEC and FINRA registered, to help them understand, what vulnerabilities they face and how to look at, how they would look at their firm like a hacker does and figure out what needs to be plugged and patched. So today, we're going to go through a hack. And when you think about who we're imitating here, attackers come in a number of different flavors, and you can divide them up how you want. There's government-sponsored hackers, and we'll dive in more into that a little bit, especially with North Korea. And we just got a North Korean alert about, Bitcoin loss and that sort of thing. So we're going to talk about that. There's organized crime. There's hacktivists, generally not a threat for a lot of you. But perhaps some. There's insider threats, which we'll talk about. There's opportunistic hackers and script kiddies, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about internal user error. And when we talk about internal user error, we're talking about things that your employees might have done that compromise security that you weren't even aware of. And one of the big issues we're dealing with right now is the remote desktop protocol. So people working from home and remotely accessing their desktop. So I want to round back out a little bit to state-sponsored hackers, because a lot of firms kind of have this idea that, well, we're not really the target of a nation state, or we're not dealing in Bitcoins or, anything of that nature. But it goes a little bit deeper in that. In terms of, when we look at the cyber warfare battlefield several years ago, a group of hackers known as the shadow brokers was able to penetrate into the NSA's equation group, or their TAO group. This is the NSA's group of elite hackers. This is the group that Edward Snowden was in, for example. And all their tools were leaked. So, that basically means that when we're doing an ethical hacker penetration test, we have access to all these backdoors, the same as some of the most advanced nation states, which means that, of course, malicious hackers also have that. So, it's just something to be mindful of as you think about, the type of attacks that are out there and how easy it is to actually get into a firm as we walk through this demo. I like to start with this map just to, we can all kind of get on the same page of what we're talking about. And I use this map when I'm talking to clients and we're talking about, how we're going to test our actual network. But it's a good overview of what a typical firm may look like. And some of you have much more complicated infrastructure than this, and some of you have, much more simple infrastructure than this, but it still gives you a good idea. We can think of an office as being an intranet. Within that office or in that intranet, there's going to be workstations, which may be desktops and laptops. There may be a print server or a printer, application servers or whatever may be going on in your office. There may be also, file sharing with backup arrays or whatever may make up that office. And the traffic that is outbound from that office is generally going to pass through a router and a firewall, and maybe even some IDS or IPS systems, which are intrusion detection and prevention systems. before it reaches the internet. And similar, you may have like a DMZ where you have a website or an email server that's not, locally hosted, but it's still part of your domain and connected through the internet. And then, of course, right now, we definitely have the situation of remote office, whether that be a physical office or an employee working from home. But similar setup, they're going to have whatever is on that network connected through a firewall or a switch, and again, going to the internet. So when we're thinking about a hack, there's really three ways that someone could get into a network and get into a sensitive environment that they shouldn't. One is externally, where we're sitting, at our office, we're using a laptop, we're pivoting through the internet and taking advantage of remote desktop or taking advantage of a vulnerability in the firewall or the router to get through and ultimately receive traffic here. There's also internal penetration testing. So this could be if I was physically in your office and testing Wi-Fi networks and testing locks on doors and server rooms and that sort of thing. And then there's also social engineering. So let's say, I scanned from the outside and couldn't find any vulnerabilities. I would then turn to social engineering or what we commonly call a phishing attack so that I could trick an employee into letting me into that internal network. So I hope that gives a little more clarity in what we're going to look at today. We're essentially going to look at how do you pivot in externally, how would one pivot internally, and also social engineering, just so you have a good idea of how these hacks happen. So whether we're doing a penetration test or a hacker is mapping out a target, there's generally going to be 7 stages that you go through. The first is information gathering, or what we call open source intelligence. And that's just the ability to go out and collect as much information as we can about your firm to see what sensitive information may already be out there that we could use in an attack. Once we do that, we're going to start doing target discovery. So we want to know where your website's located, where your email server is located. Are you using file sharing? What service providers are you using? So that we can figure out where the targets are that we need to be attacking. Once we know those targets, we'll move to vulnerability mapping. So, if we have a list of the different systems and servers that you're running, we can then go and map those systems against known vulnerabilities and see where we may be able to attack. Now, if you are up to date and everything has been updated on your systems, you're using Office 365, you're constantly keeping it updated and doing what you need cybersecurity wise, to be strong, there's a great chance that we're not going to find a vulnerability. And at that point, we're going to move to social engineering. Now, in terms of an attack, if I can bypass social engineering, that is going to be the best solution for me. If I'm a malicious hacker, I want to have as little interaction as possible with an actual human, because interaction with a human is, it's a hacker. It's going to lead you to be more susceptible to prosecution and that sort of thing. So social engineering is definitely a risky move, but it's one that's extremely effective. And so I'm going to show you how that happens today. And then there's target exploitation. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, and privilege escalation and pivoting. So if I can get a person to click on a link, I can take control of their laptop or workstation. How do I pivot and move throughout the network and infect other computers and take control of those? And then, of course, an attack. So once you hit stage 6 and you start monitoring a network, oftentimes there's months of just silent surveillance where you're watching a network and trying to figure out what's going on, looking at the traffic and where that traffic may be going. So the attack stage is generally going to be the longest stage. If you look at SolarWinds, and I know this is an evolving attack, but it looks like they may have had access for up to 9 months, before it was even notified. So the attack stage is generally pretty long. So, what is an attack? When I start a penetration test, I generally have no idea what I'm going to be able to compromise or what I'm going to be able to control. Can I steal a list of client names? That's not good, right? That's a bad thing, but ultimately it probably isn't that risky, right? If I just have names of your clients, yeah, it's terrible that it was lost, but ultimately that's not a very damaging attack. What we're concerned about is the attacks that are damaging, and most specifically when money goes missing. You know, and I always tell my clients that, you know, you can think about hacks in two different flavors. One is data goes missing, and the other is that money goes missing. When data gets compromised, 99% chance you're not even going to know it. It's going to be taken. The hacker is going to clean his tracks and be out. And that attack is never going to be associated with you, and you're not going to be the wiser to it. Of course, when money goes missing, it's extremely devastating. And we're going to talk about how that happens. You know, to the same extent, credit card data being missing, there might be a few, I'm looking at the attendee list here now, but you know, this is for financial planners. I know a lot of financial planners take credit card data. You know, hopefully you're using a service like Square and not locally storing those credit cards, but that could be lost. And of course, business email compromise, which is a huge one where, you know, if we can compromise your email server and have access to all your emails, that is pretty devastating. And keep a lookout too. So we actually have a client who, so with the SolarWinds hack, we've had a massive uptick in the amount of money that's actually gone missing, right? So we've moved from data attacks to money missing attacks. So we're going to have a guest on here, hopefully in about 3 weeks. We're still working on the program, where he is, he's going to come on and talk about his experience. He was 300 million RIA, no custody. It was with a very well-known custodian, and ultimately an account got compromised because of a business email compromise. So we're going to have him on to tell his story, which I think will be pretty interesting. So there's 3 extremely effective methods of an attack, and these are the 3 that we're really seeing tick up the boards right now and cause serious problems. Exploiting the personal router of an employee. I'm not going to dive into that exploit in this video. If you're interested in it, there's several videos on our website that show how you actually go in and exploit a router. But essentially what happens is we now have a bunch of employees working at home, and they're sending sensitive data through modems that they don't own and they don't control. And unfortunately, those modems are generally issued by the internet service providers or the ISPs, and they are historically known to be extremely vulnerable. The ISPs don't keep them updated. They don't keep firmware pushed and that sort of thing. So it's pretty easy to find an exploit in a router. And once we can exploit a router, it gives us the ability to manipulate everything about that network. So you may have a client that thinks she's going to fidelity.com, and then he or she all of a sudden they get a website that looks like fidelity.com, and they enter their you know, they enter their login credentials and nothing happens. And what happened is actually someone infected that router, installed what's known as DNS poisoning, and sent the person to a malicious website so that they could collect credentials. Pretty devastating attack, and we're seeing those come out a little bit. The one that's really hitting it right now is the remote desktop protocol. So a lot of employees in such a pinch moved to just running Microsoft Remote Desktop. It wasn't set up correctly. And of course, if I can exploit remote desktop on a computer, it gives me the ability to control your computer as if I was you. So if you have access to trading, I have access to trading. If you have access to cashiering, I have access to cashiering. So obviously, extremely devastating attack. And then we're also going to talk about old school phishing, going out and how does a phishing attack happen. I think, you know, we'll dive into it a little bit more, but I want to talk about the realities of what a phishing attack looks like, because in my opinion, what you find is that typical cybersecurity training doesn't prepare you for that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So when we're starting in stage 1 of the attack, let's dive into the attack now. When we're starting at stage 1, we want to know as much information about that firm as we can. So in general, I want to know what systems you're using, what service providers you're using. I want to know what usernames your employees are using. I want to know their passwords. I want to know their IP addresses. And I want to know who are the key and the vulnerable employees in your firm. So who are the traders, who are the cashiers, who have access to you know, that sort of data, and who might have admin access to the IT network. So those are the people that I'm going to target. So I'm going to show you a program we use called Multigo. Let me dive out here and jump in. So Multigo, scan in a little bit here. have a feeling. Yep. So I was going to try to, let's see. It's going to try to full screen it there, but it's going to a different screen. So let me make this a little bit bigger here. This is what we call an open source intelligence map. And this is a map that we built for an actual client. It's been anonymized, and it walks through how we attacked this particular client. And if you're interested in seeing any more of the detail on this, we have several walkthroughs where we show how we ultimately ended the exploit. But the attack goes something like this. We start with a domain name up here at the top. So that could be abcwealthmanagement.com. Down below that, we'll go and we'll map the different systems that are running on that particular network. So, is there an admin? Is there an FTP? Are there email servers? Is there a website? We want to know everything that's associated with that domain. Down below that, we'll take what systems are there and map the IP addresses of them. So now we know what IP addresses are available for those networks, and we can begin to test those IPs for vulnerabilities. We're also going to look at things like the website and see what services are built into the website. So if I know he has particular plugins or anything that may be valuable or vulnerable, that is what we want to start targeting. And then also we'll go in and we'll pull email addresses. So a lot of you guys put your email addresses right on the website. If you don't, there's a host of other ways that we can collect email addresses. But ultimately what we want to do, let me back out a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. Up at the top here, we took a couple email addresses. And below that, we mapped the different dark web data breaches that we found information about these email addresses in. So these are pretty popular ones and not something that was unreasonable for an employee to be using. But for instance, we found information in the LinkedIn breach that happened in 2012. We found information from the Dropbox breach, which happened in 2012. And on and on. So these are all services that, an employee might have been using. In this particular example, I don't have Adobe, but Adobe was a big one. A lot of people have Adobe accounts, and that was a pretty serious breach. And then down below the breaches that we found information in, I map what information I was able to find. So in this particular example, we found leaked usernames, we found their website activity, we found their IP addresses, we found their passwords, dates of birth, geographic locations, phone numbers, partial credit card data. Oftentimes we come across credit reports, things like that have been breached. And ultimately in this client, with the IP address, we were able to scan. We found a open remote desktop vulnerability, so we were able to take control of the system. We also found home security footage, 16 internal cameras inside of his home, where we were able to access and basically watch real time what was going on in his house. We had full access to the security system and that sort of thing. So it was a terribly scary hack. And what's even scarier is that this takes us less than about 10 minutes to put together. So it's a pretty fast process where we can go in and map these type of exploits. And ultimately he had plugged in a security system and never took away the default password. So it was super easy to get in. And I have a full video of this that shows exactly how we got in and talks a little bit more about the hack if you're interested. But anyway, that's what we do in terms of building open source intelligence. So once I know the name of a firm that I'm going to attack, I can quickly go through and build out this map and know exactly where I'm going to be able to attack them. So that's an interesting one when you know what firm you want to go after. But oftentimes you might not know what firm you want to go after. You might want to find the lowest hanging fruit, So let's say I've become really good at exploit A, and that exploit may be taking advantage of a remote desktop system. And so, the question is, well, how can we go and find systems that are vulnerable to that particular exploit? And that's where I want to introduce you to Shodan.io. And I encourage all of you to find out your IP addresses and go plug them into Shodan and see what is leaking out there. So Shodan is a search engine for what we call the Internet of Things. So if you think about Google, if you go into Google and you type in cybersecurity, it's going to pull topics from the most relevant blogs and web pages, and that's how they build their search. Shodan builds searches by what is actually connected to the network. What physical devices are they? Alexas? Are they Roombas? And that sort of thing, and it will map them. So here's a sample scan I did where I went in and said, show me every network that has port 3389 open, which is traditionally the remote desktop protocol port, and has the word Schwab in it. And I chose Schwab because there was actually nothing vulnerable in this report. But if you come in and replace that with other words such as investment or financial advisor, you're going to very quickly see the desktops of people who should not have their desktops open. And you can see this one pulled back resorts. Here's an Anna Schwab. This is her Windows Server desktop. Here's another one just labeled Schwab. Here's Barry Schwab's desktop, who has wide open. He's even got a picture of himself. So if I was going after Barry, it's going to be pretty easy to find him on social media, and on and on. So again, I chose Schwab here because I didn't see any vulnerable systems. But if you go in and type in other keywords there, it's going to bring up systems that are very vulnerable. So this is what we call, kind of a easy attack or an opportunistic attack. If I know that I can affect remote desktop protocol and attack a trading system, I'm just going to go in and quickly search and try to find the lowest hanging fruit for someone who meets my criteria and has access to a trading platform and has their remote desktop wide open here. So, even, with this, if I were to, let's say we're going to attempt to penetrate this system, which it's showing us as a Windows 7 system, which we know is going to be extremely vulnerable. One of the things I'm going to do is go back to my Multigo map here and find what passwords are associated with that account, and I'm going to try those passwords, and I'm going to try iterations of those passwords to get in. So anyway, that is, it's not always about being the target of a hack. Sometimes it's just about being the lowest hanging fruit. You may have had an employee that accidentally turned on remote desktop and is working from home and hadn't secured that. And next thing you know, they pop up in a Shodan search and someone's coming after them. They didn't even click on anything or really do anything bad other than what they thought they were doing to get their job done. So that's the opportunistic hacker. And we do see a lot of that. I know the North Koreans especially act on that by searching networks through programs like Shodan and looking for open ports that would be working on Bitcoin servers and that sort of thing. So, sometimes it's not about being a target. Sometimes it's just about accidentally not keeping something secure. So once we know the targets, jumping back to that Multigo map, or if we found something in Shodan, the next thing we're going to do is just go through and test it for a number of vulnerabilities. I use Nessus when we do our scans. I've had great success with Nessus through the years. It keeps our reports really well organized. We've actually deployed this with some of our clients that want to manage this in-house. This is like a one-time fee for them where they can go in and manage their systems. And for full clarity, we're completely independent of Nessus. We don't, work with them in any way. It's just a really great piece of software. So for firms that are wanting to bring this type of work in-house, Nessus is a great product. It's one of the things I like about Nessus. It actually goes through and will do these shadow broker scans, which I feel like it does better than any other vulnerability. And the shadow brokers is what I referred to earlier. Those were very devastating backdoors that were released into the wild. And of course, it's going to search for WannaCry and that sort of thing. So while clients, like yourselves, can deploy this to help protect their networks, ethical hackers and malicious hackers go through and use this to find vulnerabilities in your network so that they know how to attack them. So once we have that, we'll go through and start the attack. So as I mentioned earlier, you might not always find an attack. You might, if we're looking at a system and they have a dedicated IT firm and everything is up to date, a lot of times it's going to be hard to find an exploit or an exploitable system that's worth dedicating any time to. So at that point, we're going to move to phishing. And I want to show you the reality of how a phishing attack happens. And so let me pull up a terminal here. And in this terminal, let's see, let me clear it out here. So in this terminal, we're going to launch what's known as the social engineering toolkit. And the social engineering toolkit is exactly what it says. It is meant to go out and break into systems and take advantage and get people to click and that sort of thing. So if I'm in this, I'm launching it, I'm going to choose option 1. We want to look at a social engineering attack. And here it's going to give me several different options. We're going to look at spear phishing attacks, and in a little bit, we're going to talk more about infectious media generator. And these are things that when people say don't plug USB into your network, this is what they're talking about. This is an easy system to make vulnerabilities and exploits and backdoors that are super easy to get into. So for instance, let's say, let's do a spear phishing attack. And we want to create a file format payload, which is option 2. And the one thing that is a pretty universal guarantee is, as an industry, we have learned that PDF is a trusted source or something that can be trusted. And when you get a PDF in your email, some people have the notion that it's safe and they will open it up. And so for me, that is always one of my first attacks, is going to be option number 13, where I take a PDF and I embed it with a .exe social engineering exploit. And so let's choose that option. And I'm going to choose my own PDF for attack. And it's asking me to enter the line to where my PDF is stored. I'm just going to click enter. What I would do in a real world attack is I would take a blank PDF, or I might even spend a little bit of time and go download a fake brokerage account PDF off of the internet. I'm going to label it something, ABC Wealth Management 401k, and put a date on it, right? So it looks like perhaps it's an account statement. Then I'm going to come in and insert one of these exploits in here. And some of these are very sophisticated, like option number 7 will actually tunnel the vulnerable communications in an encrypted manner so that antivirus can't pick it up, intrusion protection systems can't pick it up, and that sort of thing. So these are very devastating attacks. And when they happen in the wild, it generally happens that an advisor or a firm gets an email and it says something like, Dear John, I've got $15 million at Merrill Lynch. I've had it with them, the last time or whatever. Can you help me manage my money? And this is what we call the excited advisor hack. If you can get someone excited, all of that cybersecurity training that they've had goes out the window. If they think $15 million is about to come in and it's super easy as just opening a PDF and saying, yes, you can help, they're going to click it. There's a dark side to this too. Another attack that we've seen, and this was one of the most devastating, is that a network was compromised. They were watching. They figured out that the founder's secretary had access to cashiering because she would process RMDs and other cashiering requests. So she was given access to the system. She had posted up on LinkedIn that her husband was heading to Fort Lauderdale for a conference. She was going to miss him. She hoped he had a good time, and that sort of thing. Well, she got an email the next day that said, Becky, I hope I'm not out of place here. I'm sending you this through an anonymous email because I don't want you to know who I am. But I just saw your husband walk into a hotel room with another lady. Do you know her? And this is the other side of it. That link, that picture is going to be clicked every time. So I think it's very important as a firm, we have very realistic cybersecurity talks with our staff and people that understand it, because phishing attacks do not come in the form of a prince who is, being pushed out of his country and needs to hide gold, right? Like that's always the stereotypical one. Or, you have a long lost uncle that needs to, give a fortune or whatever the story may be. That's not how it happens at the real world. So I think we need to stop and educate our employees like that when you get something that seems very off or is not usual, you really have to stop and take a breath and figure out what's going on before you blindly click a link, because you can take the sharpest cybersecurity, aware firm out there, and attack like this is going to be devastating. So rounding that out, that's how a phishing attack goes down in the real world. There's definitely other options. So when I'm scanning a firm, one of the things I'm looking at is what systems they're using. I want to know if they're using Adobe, want to know if they're using Office 365, because depending on what they're using is how I'm going to map my attack and go through and put that into play. So I want to talk about physical access too, because this is one that I think many firms fail on. They think that, you know, a Wi-Fi network is locally contained and it might not be susceptible. One of the first things I do when I'm doing a penetration test is I will arrive at the client's office generally about 30 minutes early, and I will head to the nearest bathroom, and I will sit down and I will deploy my equipment and start seeing what's going on that network and seeing if it's vulnerable and how we can get in. A lot of times you'll find that it's super easy to get in through the Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is actually not the most secure communications out there. You know, I know we've worked with several firms, and I've been employed by several firms that have just done away with Wi-Fi altogether because it was so much of a hassle to keep the encryption up to date, that it really just didn't have any place in a network that was using secure information. So it's to say, you know, if you're using Wi-Fi, you definitely have to make sure it's got the AES encryption on it, and using, you know, every available security protocol on it so that it can't be broken. That password has to be extremely complicated because the way Wi-Fi networks are, we can actually capture a handshake and take it offline and start cracking it that way so that we can hit it with 10,000 iterations a minute, and we're not actually pinging any networks and letting it know. So physical access is definitely a problem. One of the things that we carry around everywhere are what's called rubber duckies. And this is a rubber ducky. On the outside, it looks like a USB drive. On the inside, it's a miniature computer. The one vulnerability that computers will always have is that computers at their basis are set up to trust humans. And if I have physical access to a computer, it automatically assumes I am authorized to be on that computer. So when I plug in further to that, computers are also trusted to trust keyboards, right? Like that's an input device. So this USB rubber ducky will imitate a keyboard. I can plug it in and it will automatically start typing out my scripts and giving me access to whatever I need. One of the latest ones coming out is called the OMG cable, and the OMG cable comes in any flavor that you need. Here is one in the Apple iPod charger flavor. When you inspect these, they look identical to an actual, you know, Apple product or, you know, an Android cord. You can't tell by touch. But when you plug that into your phone, everything about your phone and the communication on it will then be compromised. And, you know, again, it's you can be updated. You can have the most up-to-date Apple and Android, but when you plug in something to your phone or your computer automatically gives that a high level of trust. And so we get access, you know, either, you know, walking in and putting in a rubber ducky, or using an OMG cable, or using, these are known over here on the right, these are known as Pineapple Wi-Fi radios. And we'll use those to read the traffic and get access. So all that's to say is that when I can take a photo like this and nobody questions it, that's a major failure. You know, this is a firm that had great cybersecurity on the outside, but ultimately anyone would have been able to walk in and plug in whatever they wanted into this network. No one knew who I was, no one batted an eye, no one asked why I was there. So, you know, when we talk about physical security, this is what we're trying to prevent. So, you know, whatever way we get in, you know, maybe we phish somebody, maybe we found an internal exploit through the Wi-Fi by sitting in the bathroom, or maybe we found an exploit and, you know, through the internet and got in through the network that way. You know, the next thing is the attack, right? And as we mentioned, that attack can be a long time. A lot of times someone wants to get, a hacker wants to get access to the network and just quietly monitor what's going on and seeing if it, you know, is this a worthwhile target? You know, do I actually launch an attack? What's my chances of getting away with attack? What are the fruits of my labor? That sort of thing. But, you know, in the end, they can be very devastating. And so I just have some clips here of a couple different hacks that were related to actually money going missing. Generally, you're going to find it's a lot of Russian nationals, it's a lot of North Koreans that are doing this, and it's organized crime. And I can tell you a little bit about the SEC and Eraminko case here. This was the SEC's graph at the very beginning showing their illegal profits from hacking. They actually went directly into Edgar, and we're getting information that way. Of the total profit that they made. I think the SEC was able to collect less than 20% of that from Andre, and I think a few of these others didn't even get sanctioned with anything, so they were able to walk away with profit. So it's extremely difficult, and this is another thing to iterate on. A lot of people buy cyber insurance and think that that's going to save the day, and you have to read those cyber insurance policies very closely, because a lot of them will not pay unless there is attribution to an attack. And attribution is extremely difficult. When the U.S. government says, come out and they say, oh, we know it was North Koreans, we know it was Russians, that's because the North Koreans and Russians don't care. They use the same trade craft, they use the same servers over and over, because they just don't care if it's attributed to them. Malicious hacker organized crimes, on the other hand, are going to be very, very diligent in their operational security, and it makes attribution to those crimes incredibly difficult. Further, when we do a penetration test, because we want to test all aspects of that network, we originate traffic from the United States, we will originate traffic from Mexico, we will do it from South Korea, and we'll do it from Ukraine or some other ex-Soviet country, because we want to see how the network interacts with those, right? Does it treat them differently? And even with the cyber policies, a lot of them now will say that if that attack touched any server overseas, it's now an act of war and the cyber insurance policy won't pay. So it's just one of those things to say, make sure you know what you're buying and make sure you're doing the things to protect it, because when money goes missing, it really does hurt. The other one that, is and this isn't really anything that you guys can control, but it's things to be mindful of. If you remember, I forget what day does it say? But this was, I think this was maybe the last year of Obama's presidency, but the Associated Press's Twitter account was hacked. And this was the headline that went out: breaking, 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama injured. And look at the trade right here. Look at this steep down. If you're a hacker right here, you're shorting the market as much as you can and putting in buy limits right here and closing out that position while the market figures out that was fake news. And this is extremely profitable. You leverage this up, this type of hack is going to send markets moving. And I can see some of you guys up here probably kind of nodding. I know some of you are hedge funds traders, but these are the type of things that you have to watch out for, because the hack might not be against your firm. It might be against other firms. So, when you see things like this, or, even if they're coming from your service providers, we're definitely a point in our industry where we have to stop and take a breath and say, what's really going on here? Because since November, it has been, it's been like the Wild West with SolarWinds. So anyway, getting kind of long-winded there, but hacks come in a ton of different flavors. You can dive in and read all about them, the ones that the SEC prosecutes and that sort of thing. But it's just to say, money does go missing. Even if you don't have custody, it can happen. So guys, I thank you all for being here and coming in and listening to what I have to say. If anyone has any questions or anything, I saw a couple pop up here during the presentation. I tried to address them, but if you guys have any more, please feel free to reach out. Of course, if you want to do it in a private form, email or the cell phone number here is the best way to get in touch with me. And be happy to help. But I hope that kind of gives some insight into what goes on from the hacker's perspective during an attack, because I think the key takeaway is cybersecurity isn't expensive. You don't have to go out and hire a firm that you're paying a monthly fee to and they're providing active monitoring. That gets very, very expensive and isn't always the most effective. Sometimes just having things like 2-factor authentication in place and using VPNs and keeping your systems up to date. These are all low cost or free items that go a long, long way in making my job or a malicious hacker's crime much more difficult. So again, guys, I hope that helps. I hope that was insightful. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm going to send around a recording of this here shortly, and I'll have a couple supporting documents that'll go with it as well. things just like a quick checklist that you can go through. That again, I try to focus on free or extremely inexpensive things that you guys can do to make this, make yourselves a little bit more secure. So anyway, I'll send that out here shortly as soon as we get the video processed, and I'll stand by if you guys have any questions. Thanks so much.